Usually at this point, I would start with a little game and hand out goodies to the first person who is able to detect correctly where my accent comes from. Unfortunately, I don't have goodies to give today, but you can still play the game and let me know after the session. It's always very entertaining what some of the answers are. 13,000 apps, that's a number I just heard, are today in the Windows Phone marketplace. I very well remember the day when we hit another important milestone, and that milestone was 100 apps. That's only a few months ago. It was the time before the public launch of Marketplace. And on the engineering team, we had a couple of folks kind of switch gears for a little while, and we teamed up with the partners that were building these first 100 apps for our new platform and for the new Marketplace. And that effort was very fruitful. Not only did we get some of the top apps into the Marketplace that you know today, but also there were a couple of really important lessons that we learned from that. Lessons for the app developer, lessons for our developer documentation, and also lessons for the engineering team to take into the planning for the next version. Today I want to talk about the lessons for you, the application developer. My name is Stefan Wick. I'm a test manager on the Silverlight team, and primarily I'm focused on Silverlight for Windows Phone. So this is my last slide. Well, actually, it was supposed to be my last slide, but I put it right on top to make sure you actually read it. There's a couple of other closely related and very important sessions that I would like to recommend at this point. In order to build successful applications, performance and design are very important topics. I will not cover those today in this talk, but there are other talks that I recommend. Specifically, Jeff Wilcox's talk on Thursday. He will go and talk about application performance, current topics as well as future topics, so that will be very interesting and useful for you guys. Also, if you are relatively new to the platform, I want to point out some new developer guidance that we have up on MSDN. There's a link here, and this is kind of a white paper with a sample app that walks you from the beginning to finish and explains how you build a complete app. And I will actually have the app here in one of my demos a little later. And last but not least, all the demo sources that I will show today, I will make them available for download in the next few days, so don't have to take notes or take screenshots or anything. So what's the goal for today? What does it mean to build a successful Windows Phone application? One important metric here is the customer rating that you see in Marketplace. After they've downloaded your application, they go in and state their opinion and give you a rating. This rating is frequently used by other customers then to choose which applications they buy or try out or download for free. And if your rating typically is below the average, you run a pretty high risk that your application will not get noticed, people will not download it, they might not even bother doing the trial. So what I want to do today is give you some of the most important tips that you need in order to avoid a rating of 2 stars or below, and to get you to a rating that allows you to get 4 stars, 5 stars, and be in the top of the list. This is our agenda for today. So for the next 45 minutes, I will walk through this. Mostly, we will spend time in Visual Studio and in the emulator to look at demos and look at code. I want to call out at this point that this is not a beginner section, so it's not an introduction into building applications. So I do assume that most of you have some experience with the tool set, some experience with Silverlight, as well as some experience with the Windows Phone in some shape or form. If you don't, I still hope you enjoy the session and you take something useful away, but it will get a little bit technical in just a little bit. And so with that, I will start with the first demo for today. And this is a topic where we've seen initially a lot of the third-party applications had some problems implementing their application in a way that is consistent with the Windows Phone navigation paradigm and the concepts that are used throughout the experience on the Windows Phone. The model there is really nice and simple, and it's very consistent throughout all applications on the phone. And there is an expectation by the user that third-party applications behave the same. If they don't, it's a distractive experience, and in the worst case, it can also cause your application to fail certification. So let's look at the first demo here. So I built a little app. It's kind of random, so please don't judge. So it has a little login screen. So I log into my phone here. And I want you to pay a little bit attention to the little control on the top here with the orange list. This control displays the current navigation stack. And this way you know exactly where we are. Typically a user obviously doesn't see that, but this will help you to visualize some of the problems that an app might hit, and then also show how to solve these. So it's a little app that has some of the common tasks that I would do every day using my phone. For example, I can send a message and start typing. And you all know typing on a phone is very tedious. You don't want to lose your data for sure. So I can submit my message. Everything works. I'm fine. I go back, try something else. Here are my quotes. Well, everything read today, kind of a bad day. But it's live data. I cannot do anything about it. So everything seems to work, right? So I'm ready to submit to Marketplace and ready to make $1 million. So not quite. So if we poke a little bit deeper into the application and drive the navigation aspects to a little more of the edge, we will see there are actually a couple of problems. So let's try this again in a more kind of real world scenario. I'll type my message. Now I remember I want to do something else. I actually want to check my stock quotes, and so I go back to my home screen and select my other little applet to give me my stock quotes, and now I want to go back and finish my message. So what now has happened? Where's my message that I just typed? I'm confused and frustrated because I spent all this time typing and now it's gone. Well, with a little diagnostics here, we see, okay, we're probably just on a different message now. And if the user is smart enough, he will figure out that they just have to go back far enough, and there they have their message. But at this point, they might already be confused because they don't know where they are in the application and how to get back to the data. So, but okay, at least I have my data back now, and so I can continue writing my message. No data loss, and I can submit it. Okay, so at this point, the user is probably not too annoyed yet with your app. It's still kind of, he got the job done, but now they want to exit the app, and, well, instead of exiting, they're now back at the login screen. They want to exit, but not log in, so what do? And they want to go further back, and the app doesn't let me. Now, this is the point where the user really gets frustrated because they don't know how to get out of the application. They can't, they basically perceive your app as broken. So let's look at the code and fix the problem to see kind of what's really going on here. So we've put this login page in at the beginning of our navigation stack, and so whenever the user goes back far enough, they will get back here. That's just how navigation works. So the developer of this application didn't fully understand the concept, and let's see how we can fix it. So semantically, the login page here is not really something that you want permanently on your back stack. It's more kind of a transient UI. You only need it if the app is launched for the first time and there is no user context available. After that, you basically don't want to display it. So what I want to do instead is not make it a page in my navigation model, but just implement the same thing as a control. So I'm just copying the same amount of the same XAML, exactly the same thing, just over into a user control instead of a page. And now I can just add this user control on top of my start page. It's going to be kind of an opaque overlay, and I can control the visibility of it. When I need it, I will show it. When I don't need it, I don't. So I'll go to my start page here, and all I need to do is add this control to my page. And the last thing I need to do now is actually tell my application not to use the login page anymore. It's now obsolete. There's no reason to do this. And we will start with the start page right away. So let's deploy this change. And so I get the exact same UI. User doesn't know whether it's a page or a control. I log in. And so now if you see the backstack diagnostics on top, there's no login page here. I'm on my start page right from the beginning. And now if I press the back button, I exit as expected. User is happy, problem is fixed. Let's go back real quick to the other problem that we first saw, and we want to fix that as well. The problem there was, we had implemented this home button that the user can click to go back to your start page. But what this really does is it just navigates forward to your start page, so adding to your backstack, which in most cases just confuses the user. So the simple fix for this one will be just not do this, and I can just completely get rid of this home button, and this way the user won't get into that trouble of creating these circular navigation loops. There are some cases where you might actually want to do this kind of navigation, and you need sort of loops or circular navigation. There is guidance for doing that. In general, we recommend avoiding it. But if you want to search on App Hub, there is a white paper. If you search for circular navigation, that will explain with really good code samples how to do it. Essentially, what you do is, instead of navigating forward, you navigate backwards on the stack programmatically until you hit the page that you need to hit. This way, you don't create these extra pages on the stack. Okay, so that was good. So we fixed a few problems in our app. Let's see if it's now working or if there are still other problems. Let me again do my task. I want to send a message. And now I want to take advantage of the new copy and paste feature that we have in Nodo and go out to the web or to some other app, copy some text, and include that in my message. So I'll just grab something here, go back to my app, and now, whoops. So copy and paste works great. That's fine. But where's my message? Anyone knows what happened? It's gone, yeah. Anyone know why? Okay, so we got tombstoned. Just real quick refresher on what is tombstone. It's part of the Windows Phone execution model. When the user navigates forward from a third-party application to another application on the phone or to the menu or whatnot, the operating system stores an entry on the global backstack for your application, and it stores the page where you were on, and it gives you a chance, it gives you an event to persist your state to a data store that the operating system maintains. And then your process is killed at this point. Now, when the user goes back, the process is restarted, and you get back to the same page where you were, and whatever data you persisted, you can now depersist. But apparently, my little application didn't persist the content of the message, so that's why it's gone. So now let me show what is the code that was missing in the application to make this work correctly. So we were looking at the message page. And so the general rule is whenever you navigate away from your page, you should persist your state because you don't know when you will get tombstoned. And so you want to make sure it's saved. And when you come back, you get called on navigated to. And that is the point in time where you can read again from your store and restore your state. So let me just fix this real quick and add this. I want to call out one small optimization here that I've added here that you might not have seen in some of the common guidance. So generally we tell you save on navigated from, which is the right thing to do, and everyone does it. But in 50% of the cases, you navigate backwards, and when you navigate backwards, your page and your state is about to get destroyed anyway, and you will never get back to that exact same instance. So in these cases, it's actually not necessary to save the state because there's no way you'll ever get back to that exact instance. So that's a small optimization I've added here. I have kind of a global helper here that detects when I'm navigating backwards, and in that case, I don't save my state, only when I'm navigating forwards. All right, so let's deploy this. And type our message again, do our search. And now when we come back, everything is as expected. The data has been persisted, and we've restored it successfully. I can finish my message and send it. Okay, so that was actually one of the most common issues that we've seen when we were working with the first set of apps, getting Tombstone right, making sure all the data is persisted and the state gets restored correctly. There's another class of issues closely related that we haven't seen that often, but it does happen, and I'll show that's here. So I was going to my stock page now, and what happened is I get thrown back to my start screen. So what this typically means is I hit a crash that I didn't handle, or I hit an exception that I didn't handle, and so my application exited. Let's see what did I wrong in my code and how do I fix it. So I'm on my stock site. I want to do Tombstone. We don't need this. So I did the Tombstone. Now when I go back to my app, we'll see now in the debugger what happens. The constructor from my stock page gets called when I come back, and I want to restore, I want to figure out what is the currently logged on user. So I check this global property that gives me the username, and when I wrote the application, I made the assumption whenever I'm on the stock page, the user must be logged in, right? There's no other way to get there. Well, except if you come back from Tombstone and you didn't persist that user information. And this is exactly what happened here. So this global property I did not persist in my property back. So let's fix this real quick. So I have this property here in my app.xaml.cs. And so I actually did persist it correctly during deactivated. That is the event that is called when your application, or just before your application gets tombstoned. But when I come back from Tombstone and activated gets called, I forgot to actually pull it back out of the property back. So that's what I'm doing now. Now my global state is restored, and it should work. Tombstone, coming back, and now my app is back, data is there, no crash, it's a seamless experience for the user. So now my app is in good shape navigation-wise. I'm not able to find any more bugs, so we're good to go. let's go back to the presentation. So just to reiterate the key takeaways here, avoid transient pages like the login page. Use controls or pop-ups instead. Avoid circular navigation through home buttons or other mechanism. Or if you do need this, walk the stack properly. And most importantly, the app needs to serialize their state in order to account for Tombstone. This might not apply to every app and every page. If you're just building an iFart app, maybe you'll get away without doing it. But most, real, more complex apps will have to do it. And the thing to remember there is you should test this for every page in your application, just as you saw in my demo. The message page had a different problem compared to the stock page. So you want to make sure for each of these pages you have a test where you go to the page, then go outside of your application and come back and verify you're still in a good shape. All right, next topic, phone states. So that was probably the second biggest set of issues that we've seen with the first apps. That the code they wrote was not really aware or handling well the different states that a phone can be in. And back in the day, maybe it was also more difficult because people didn't have real phones yet. They did most of the testing in the emulator. But today, it's the device availability is much better, and we really highly recommend everyone to test their applications on real devices and also in real-world situations. So take your app out for a walk, go where the network connectivity is not so good, and also just play with the phone. Use different features and see how your app actually responds to that. And I will show you a quick demo here that shows some of the common problems that people run into with different phone states. So actually, we'll use the same demo. But before I do this, I want to change a couple of states. I want to change my theme. And I also want to change my region. So this will be a 5-second reboot. Another thing I'm going to do now is unplug my network cable. And so here we are. So same application. We've already tested it. We've already fixed it. We know everything's working perfectly, right? So let's do it again. We've just changed a few parameters here on the system, and I want to check my quotes. Whoops, not good. Can't get to my quotes. I just crash. Now you might say, okay, that's probably not so unexpected because I plugged the network cable. Okay, that's a good observation, but there's a certification requirement that your app should not crash. Even if it requires network and there is no network, you should pop up a friendly message saying, this is why it's not working. There is no network, and goodbye. So this is what I didn't handle properly. There was a web exception thrown in my code, and so this is something I need to fix. So this one will be an easy fix. I can just wrap this into try catch and then display a nice little error. Okay, so now the user knows what's going on, and at least they don't blame it on the quality of your app. They blame it on the quality on the network. So let me plug back my cable here. Hopefully connection comes back. And yeah, so now I got the data again, but what happened? There are two big problems here. First of all, the names of my stocks disappeared. Second, the quotes are obviously wrong. They look like, by a factor of 1,000 higher than they were just a minute ago when we tested the application. And we didn't change any line of code. So let's debug what just happened here and then fix it. So on the stock page, this is where my data template is for the stock prices and the stock names. So this is where I bind my text block to the symbol and to the name. And so what I did in my code is I set the foreground to white because I thought that looks nice on the phone that I tested. It had a black background and white foreground. But now when the user changes the theme, background becomes white, and if you hard code to white or hard code to any color, the theme will not update it. So what you should do instead, in the general case, is always use the themed resources for all your colors. So instead of white, I'll use phone foreground brush. So this will be white on the dark theme, but when the user switches to light theme, it will automatically adjust to black. Now there are scenarios where you do want to hard code colors, and that's totally okay to do. If you build kind of a branded experience, let's say you build an app for Coca-Cola, you probably want it to be mostly red and white, and you don't want those colors to change with the theme. But when you do this, you have to be sure to be really consistent about your colors and use hard-coded colors throughout and not do kind of a mix of themed resources and hard-coded colors, because then you get into trouble. Okay, so start this again. And so now my names are back. But still my quotes are messed up. How did that happen? Anyone have an idea? Currency, almost. Yeah, very good. So let's look at the code here to see the offending thing. And where is it? Stock. Right. So this is how I determine the price. I just grab it out of an XML file that displays the. Actually, let's open it up. That gives me all the price data about my. Let's see if I can get to the XML here. All right. So this is the data I get from the web. It's 25.64, and this is the way I parse it. Looks correct to me. Except the problem is, when you're not in an English locale, the decimal point has not the same meaning. So since I switched to German locale, now the decimal point is actually ignored, and I get basically by a factor 1,000 the value as my double. So this is pretty bad, and this can, since it's financial information, this can have pretty big consequences. So let's fix this real quick. What you want to do is use the invariant culture in order to do your double parsing. So this way you are sure it works in all locales. Okay, so now it's fixed. It's still red, can't do anything about it, but at least the data is now accurate. So this example is not really specific to the phone in any way. I still thought it was worth calling out, because when you build an application for a Windows Phone and put it in the marketplace, by default you want kind of a global audience. You typically don't want to limit yourself to one specific market. Even if you don't translate your app to other languages, you can still sell it in other markets. And you want to make sure your app actually works there. Otherwise, you'll get bad reviews, bad ratings, and angry customers. And you've seen in the emulator, it's very easy to test this. It's just one setting you can change, and now your emulator runs in a different language. So there's one more sort of phone state that's also very important. Let me demonstrate this as well. So let's say I'm writing a longer message here, and typically people prefer to do that in kind of a landscape mode. So they flip their phone around, and then they type from there. So, but if I hold my phone like this is not a useful experience, right? I don't really see what I'm typing, and I can't access the keys very well. Even worse, when I have a phone with a hardware keyboard, it's basically unusable. So the user expects your application to respond to orientation change, especially on pages that support text input. So that's an easy fix. Let's make this real quick. Go back to our stock page, and up on top in the XAML of each page, we have a property, supported orientations, and so the default there is portrait, and you can switch it to landscape, or you can switch it to portrait or landscape, which makes your page automatically orientation aware. That's all I need to do in this case, because my app or my page has been written, with Silverlight layout in a proper way, so it kind of adjusts automatically. If you have a lot of hard-coded positioning, then you might have to do some more work, but in many cases, it will just work. So now if I go switch my orientation, I changed it in the wrong XAML. Sorry about that. It's actually this one. It's the message page. All right. Let's do this again. Send a message. And so now when I rotate, the page automatically adjusts, everything gets laid out properly, and now I have nice access to my software keyboard, and also if I have a hardware keyboard, it works very well. So these are another very, very simple thing that's easy to do, and it will delight your customers and prevent you from getting a bad rating. One other tip real quick to what we just saw around the theming and the locales. One easy thing you can do in your own development process and in your own testing process. What I do, I typically have a device and my emulator, and I test sometimes there, and I keep my device on one language and on one theme, and the emulator on another language and another theme, and this way I automatically have this coverage basically for free, and I catch this kind of bugs very easily as I go. And there's a number of other phone states that are important to take care of. I didn't incorporate them all in the demo. Another big one is location services, for example. So you should account for the fact that the user might turn off the location data, and then your app should not crash and handle that correctly. And there might be other scenarios. For example, your phone actually might receive a call, and so your app might want to do something special in that case. Or the user might be playing music while they interact with your app, and in that case, there's another maybe special handling you want to do. So third big topic that we learned from working with a lot of the partners is about memory usage. The certification rules have a 90 megabyte limit for third-party applications. And so if you're building rich experiences with lots of data, lots of images, there's a pretty good chance that you're bumping up at some point against this 90 megabyte requirement. And at that point, it's time to maybe rethink a little bit, take a step back and analyze where does the memory go, and what can I do to kind of optimize things there. And generally, there are different classes of issues here that an application developer needs to address. First of all, it's the design of the application. We've seen applications that are not really designed for a memory-constrained device. Clearly, if I download a 100 megabyte file and keep that in memory as is, I can probably mathematically prove that this will not meet the 90 megabyte requirement. So that's an easy case. But then there are other cases where the design actually has thought about grouping data, and we've seen designs where people create pivot controls with 20 pivot items, and each are populated with heavy data. And then as the user navigates through all the pivots, the memory gets up and stays high. So this is something where it's maybe not entirely obvious for the application developer how the platform handles and manages the memory on their behalf. And so given that the pivot does not visualize the content automatically, so there are some pitfalls where you can easily get into if you're not aware how these things work. So I'm not going to talk too much about pivot and panner at this point, because I know Jeff will talk about it in more depth in the performance talk on Thursday. So what I want to do is actually switch to another sort of big offender in terms of memory consumption, and that is images. So I have a few demos around images prepared here. And so this is a little app that does a Bing search for images. And so the number on top here is my current memory usage. So it's not extremely accurate in the emulator, so don't pay attention to the exact absolute value, but the relative values is kind of what are kind of interesting here. So on the device, the number might look a little bit different. So let's do a search for some keywords here. And so I get a bunch of images back. And so what I'm doing here is I submit a search, which gets me back an XML file. The XML file has URLs to all the images, as well as URLs to thumbnails. And what I do here is I display the thumbnails in my UI, and not the big images, of course. And so let me do this a few more times, just to kind of highlight something. Let's see, what other famous sports do we have? Anyone here from Canada? We have folks from India. So what we're seeing here is there's two observations, and let me just kick garbage collection here real quick, just to make sure there's nothing pending. Two observations. We have a usage of roughly 16 megabytes now, even though we're just filled half the screen worth of pixels really in terms of images. And we're also seeing that for each new search, the memory seems to grow. So that's obviously not a good thing. First of all, we want ideally the baseline to be lower, and then we don't want it to grow as we submit more searches. So this is actually an example where the author of this application was not entirely aware of how the platform is allocating and managing the memory on their behalf. Because what we do is if you assign a URI to an image element, we download it, decode it, and then we cache the decoded image on your behalf. So even when your image element goes out of scope within your application, we do not delete that cache. We keep it around because we think during the lifetime of the application, you might come back and ask for the same URI. And in that case, we don't want to hit the network again. We don't want to do the decode again. We want to reuse that memory. And in most cases, that's what you want, and that's the right default. But in a scenario like this, where we're cycling through many images that are basically just throwaway and we're never ever going to use them again, it does add up to your overall usage. And you can imagine if you do this a few more times and maybe use slightly larger images, you can hit the 90 megabyte limit real quick. So let me show how to fix that, and also how to reduce the overall usage of this application right from the baseline. The other data point here is that the thumbnails that I'm downloading, even though they are smaller than the real images, but they're still 160 by 160 JPEGs. And the little squares that I have in my phone app, they are just 65 by 65 pixels. So there's actually a lot of pixels that I'm just wasting right there. So let me see how I can fix it. So this is the data template that I was using. There's nothing wrong with it. It's using the platform in a completely valid and recommended way. But so I have built an attached property that kind of optimizes the download and the management of the images for this particular purpose. And so I'll plug this in, and we'll look at the code in just a little bit. I want to start this. Actually, let's run it without debugger. And so let's do a couple more searches here. And so this one, now I'm at 10 megabytes. What are some other good keywords? I want to make sure I don't pop up anything inappropriate. So it fluctuates a little bit, but if you do this repeatedly, you will see that it kind of goes back to where it was. There's no significant changes. It kind of stays around 11 megabytes throughout, and there's no growing of memory. So that's shaved off, right out of the gate, 2 or 3 megabytes, and more importantly, it does not grow from there. So let's take a quick look at what I did to actually accomplish this. This is basically all the code that is behind the attached property that I created. What I do is I basically handle the download myself by creating a HTTP web request, and then I get my image stream from that network result. And now, before I assign it to my image element, I will decode the JPEG by myself instead of letting the platform do it for me. The platform will always decode at the natural resolution because we don't know if you ever want to resize it later or scale into it and stuff like that. But in my application, I know it will always be 65 by 65, so I can decode to that exact size and save quite a bit of memory that way. And so by doing this, handling the download myself, I also avoid the cache of the images, which I don't want in this scenario. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone, and as a result, I have a much more stable, robust app that will not run out of memory. So now there's also another scenario where there could actually be a code defect somewhere in your application or somewhere in the components that you consume that will cause a leak, or since we're talking managed code, it's, I guess, the politically correct word is object lifetime issue, but the net result is the same. It's a leak. So I have a little app here. It has a lot of content. It uses a lot of memory since I'm consuming a lot of images. But when I navigate back from my page, my expectation is all the memory is released, and I go back to where I started. And this is the case. I'm back to sort of 7 megabytes, and I've added a little bit of diagnostic here to help you visualize the problem that we'll see in this app in just a second. So what I have in this list down here is basically a snapshot of the current heap, basically filtered by UI elements. So I'm not worried about event arcs or any elements like that. I'm only focusing on the big and expensive items, which are the UI elements. And basically what you see here is what you expect. It's all the pieces on my current page. It's my main page, there's my button, here's my list box, and so on. But now let's do the demo again. And so I have one rotten apple here. Let's say I have a control that I've downloaded from some other source, and if I interact with it, it has a leak. And now when I go back, and let me force garbage collection here. Now when I go back, I see on my heap there is still this instance of the leaky control, which should have been gone because my page is gone, so everything on that page should have been destroyed. But since it has a code defect and a leak, it's still there. But what's worse is not only the leaky control is there, also the entire subtree where it was on is leaked. This is because each element has a reference to its children and to its parent, and as a result, the entire subtree gets taken down. So as a result, we see there's 20 instances of images here, and there's actually the entire page and all the children leaked. If I repeat this, you will see, this just adds up. Now I have 2 of these, 40 of these, and you can imagine this is going south pretty quickly. So what to do in this case? Well, the right thing to do is, of course, fix the code defect in the control that leaks. I'm not going to do this because this is just a malicious control that I wrote to leak, so there's nothing really to learn here. I'm just having this leak because I'm not cleaning up my timer. It just keeps ticking, and that holds a reference to my object. But let's imagine a case where you don't actually have the source for this control. You consume it from somewhere else, and it just affects your app's performance so badly that you need some sort of workaround for it. And removing it is not an option because it adds a lot of value for your app. So you're looking for another way until you get a fix for it. And so the fix really is more of a mitigation here. It doesn't fix the root cause. It doesn't fix the problem entirely. But what I can do is on my navigated from event in my page, I can just remove the offending control from my tree. Now it's still being leaked, but it doesn't take the entire tree with it. So the rest of my tree will now still be eligible for garbage collection. And let me visualize that here in a second. So I'm still leaking, going back, and now, so here's the leak control. It's still leaked, but all the images have been released, and so the big chunks that were causing the major problems, that is solved, and we have a tiny little bit here left, which might be okay in typically short-lived applications. Okay, going back to the slides. The last demo I want to show is about testing your apps. I've talked a lot so far about, hey, you need to make sure you test this, you need to make sure you test that, and then test everything again in this other configuration. So there's a lot of testing that you should do in order to be robust and to have a top-notch successful app. But now I want to give a couple of useful tips how you can actually facilitate that testing, do it in a little bit more structured way, and also in a repeatable and somewhat automated way. And for that, I'm using the fuel tracker application. So this is actually the application that you will learn to build in the new white paper on MSDN. So I've been using that as my guinea pig here, and I've wrote some tests for it. And let me show you how that looks. And so what I did is I just added another application project to the same solution. And what this one does, it just kind of wraps my Zap and applies the different tests to it. So let me show that actually here in the demo. These are my tests, and so it has a couple of different test types that you can run. You can do a manual test, obviously, which just launches the app, but it can actually be fairly useful because there's also a couple of settings that I have added here that will turn on some diagnostics that you can do. Some of these are more useful for heavily graphics applications, and then it also has a sort of leak detection built in, similar to what I just showed in the leak demo. I can do that also here in this scenario. And let me run through this real quick. So this is kind of how the app works. You set up your car, and then from there on, you can track your fuel usage and your history of mileage per gallon. And so here you can add when you do a fill up. And so now the leak detection kicks in and it tells me, hey, there's a leak on the page that you just navigated away from, and it tells me what is the tree that got leaked. And now I can go back and actually fix that page. So that is a really nice way to kind of catch these things more automatically. And actually, let me show you how you can run this in a more automated fashion, actually. So, because typically you don't want to run through all your 20 pages in a manual way, so you can also kind of write sort of a script against the API of your application, basically, and it will just go through that yourself, by itself. And then I have another sort of flavor of that. Same thing, it's basically going through everything in kind of an accelerated fashion and in a loop. So I can just, let this run and see if I hit any sort of memory problems over time, or if I hit crashes over time, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, once you have these things automated, then it comes in really handy when you can, run the same thing on different languages, on different themes, different network configurations, and so on and so forth. So doing this kind of investment will really pay back in the long run. So one last thing, we're slowly running out of time. There's also unit tests here, and you might be already familiar with that. I'm using the Silverlight unit test framework here that Jeff Wilcox has ported to the Windows Phone last year. And I've wrote some tests for this application as well. So I'll make all this available for download so you can dig into that deeper on your own time. So before we close, I want to kind of summarize some of the checkpoints that are just essential for the certification process. These are not optional. These are not just to delight your users. You really have to check these marks in order to be successful in your certification. We already talked about this one. Don't crash if there's no network, and make sure your memory is under control. Make sure you're either theme aware, or if you choose to be not theme aware, then be explicitly hard-coded to your own theme. This is more of a general thing similar to the network. Your app should never crash. Always handle the exceptions. Display something to the user, something nice and friendly. Explain to them, why things don't work. The back button, that's very important. I want to, reiterate this again. The back button is only ever supposed to do one of three things. If you're on a page in your application, the back button is supposed to navigate to the previous page. If you're on the first page, the back button is supposed to exit your application and go to the previous app. If you are on a page and there is a message box or dialog or pop-up open, the back button is not supposed to navigate. Instead, it is supposed to close that dialog. Failure to do so might cause your certification to fail. This one's important as well. It's kind of buried in the certification guidelines. But it is a common reason for failure. If you use certain features of the phone, you have to ask the user for consent, and you have to have some settings in your application so the user can opt out or opt in after the fact. This includes, for example, access to location data or other private data for the user. It also includes some aspects of music playback. Also, if you do stop the user's music playback and replace it with your own in your application, you have to resume the previous playback when you're done with your application. Okay, real quick, we're almost out of time. After you're done with the certification and you're in Marketplace, now the exciting time starts, right? You see first couple of downloads are happening. People are starting to write reviews, giving you some ratings, and now you're really eager to kind of consume all that and make your app even better by shipping an update. So, but the feedback might look like kind of a mixed bag, like this one, for example. What do you do with this set of feedback? Apparently you did something right, someone loves it, but then there are two others who are kind of, no, not really good, or I can't even use it. So now you really want to find out, why don't they like it? What can I do to improve it? For that, there's a few easy ways you can improve your app to obtain feedback in a more detailed way on an ongoing basis. You could just add a send me feedback button to your app, which will spin up an email. The user can type their thoughts or their suggestions. And also you can just capture any sort of crash data whenever there's an unhandled exception in your app. Capture that, write it to your isolated storage. Then next time the user launches the app, you see there's something in the storage, ask the user to submit this to you. This way you can see the call stack and the exception, what happened, and you might be able to fix it in an update. Alternatively, you can also send it to a web service, but for that you should ask the user for consent before doing that. And then last but not least, kind of a more professional, advanced approach to the same problem is to use some of the analytics frameworks that are out there. That will provide you a lot more detailed data about how the user is using the app, what features they're using, how much time they're spending, if they're hitting any crashes, and so on and so forth. This also has some privacy aspects, so you should ask the users there as well. And I want to point out that there's actually a dedicated talk about this from David Perschel from Preemptive Solutions. But I think, unfortunately, it's happening right at the same time as this talk, so I think you already missed out on that. But there's video recording, so you get a chance to watch it there. And that's it. So that's just a summary, and I'm opening up for questions now. Thank you. Is this on? Sorry, I can't hear you. So the certification rule is if your app peak memory usage on a 256 megabyte device ever goes above 90 megabytes, the certification will fail. Oh. Just from a runtime perspective. So just to repeat the question, what would happen if the app goes above 90 megabytes as runtime? Typically, nothing happens at that moment, so there is no hard coded limit in the runtime. You can go further. It's kind of a certification rule, but above 90, if you're on a 256 megabyte device, you will get into a range where you might crash due to out of memory. On a 512 megabyte device, of course, there's more wiggle room available. More questions? The question was, what is the isolated storage limit? There is no limit imposed today on Windows Phone, so basically you can use whatever the disk has available. That's actually a good point. Yeah, so typically devices have enough storage for the typical isolated storage that you want to store, but it's a good point. The disk could be full, and if you're storing larger images and stuff like that in your application, you could hit an out-of-disk space, and yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, it's a good question. Question was, how should the back button work for embedded browser control? So that's a really good case, a really good question. So we do allow you to customize the behavior of the back button. So on the page, you do get an on back key press event, and you can decide to do the right thing for your application. And if your application is basically primarily a browser where you're browsing web pages, then you can basically redirect that back key press to your web browser control and basically navigate that backwards instead of navigating your page backwards. Yeah, you have that control. Yeah, it's a good question. The question was specifically on the example where I caught the web exception. I think generally it's probably safer to do the try-catch broader. I don't think it's actually necessary in this case, but I might be missing an edge case here. But aside from the specific handling of that scenario, you also might want to have a global handler to catch anything that you did not expect and want to handle in a graceful way, either by displaying a message or by storing it so that maybe the app can send it later for you to analysis. Okay, so question was, when you do web service request and it's taking long, what's the recommendation? About what kind of UI to show, you mean? Yeah. So the concern is if the app just shows a straight progress bar and it takes really long time, then the user might get frustrated or doesn't know what to do. Yeah, it's a common problem. It's at the end of the day, it's up to your application, but since you're not blocking your app, the user has the choice to navigate backwards or navigate forwards. So they are in control. They are not actually blocked. You can also add a cancel button, of course, if you want to abort your web request. That's another option. Maybe it's a cleaner option. I don't have a recommendation there. It's really up to the app developer. Okay, so question was when the application gets tombstoned, or before it gets tombstoned, on what thread is it getting called? Is that your question? You have I think 10 seconds maximum to save your state before the OS will kill you for good. So you cannot just kind of hold on to that. You can do that on the UI thread or on a background thread. So that is up to you. Yeah. The process will stay alive for I think the amount is 10 seconds. Yeah, excellent question. Question was for the caching of image data when we download from URI. Is there a limit that the OS imposes, or is there in the future maybe a property that we could set? It's a topic that we're actively discussing today in the product group. Today there is no limit. We'll just keep caching, and we realize that this is probably not the ideal solution for some scenarios, because before the app runs out of memory, we should get rid of that memory, right? So yeah, really good question. It's something that we're actively investigating. Well, if you need to bring back the login screen, you are in control of the overlay that I had implemented as the solution. So if you detect a situation where you do need to bring it back because another user wants to log in or something, you can just set the visibility on that to visible, and that will overlay your start page, and the user can log in. Any more questions? All right. Thank you, everybody.